what really helped me finally take the step to say, you know what, I'm done, was having my second child, because I realized this is not sustainable. I'm curious about your shift. What was that defining moment? Was there something that happened for you where you said, now is the time for me to walk away? Now is the time to learn more? Or was it just a slow buildup?
It's both and. So one of the primary things that shifted my entire identity as a woman, and just my entire life, was my mother passing away in 2010. And when that happened, it sort of pulled a rug out from under me that I couldn't quite label at the time. I remember at the time she died, on the day of her funeral, I was just wailing and beside myself. And I asked a question out loud that would come back to haunt me later in a good way. But I asked, well, who's going to love me now? As though she was the only source of that.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't understand it at the time, but her death, in a lot of ways liberated me and my identity as a woman, but in a lot of ways left it in a huge question. Like, who was I now if I wasn't going to orient to her as the matriarch of the family? And it was quite destabilizing. And again, at the time, I wouldn't have been able to say that to you. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it to you. But looking back, I can definitely see that. And then a series of things happened for me. I ended a very long-term relationship and engagement a year after she died. And then about a year after that, I had another, very whirlwind love affair that ended very badly. And I sort of, at the end of that relationship, really realized that I wasn't living in alignment to what I desired. I was unhappy. I was starting to really feel the burnout of being a caregiver. I was craving doing deeper work with my clients and my patients, but my practice was very much set up. When you're in practice as a healthcare provider, you really are Band-Aid solution fixing. You really are, whether you're doing it with like medication as an allopathic doctor or whether you're doing it holistically with natural prescriptions, you really are working at the surface level. And there was a part of me that was really craving something deeper. And so when I had like loss after loss after loss, I just sort of hit that wall and decided to reinvent my life. Unfortunately, because I always say I'm a stubborn learner, it took another several years later, another devastating breakup for me to actually realize. And actually, I was on the phone with a coach that I was working with at the time who actually said to me, do you realize that you're addicted to the illusion of romantic love? Do you realize that you're using men and relationships to try and fill this hole? And it's in that moment that she said that to me, and she said, you're an addict, that I remembered the question I asked when my mother died. And I realized in that moment that I'd been living my entire life trying to figure out who was going to love me.
Wow.
And that was a huge turning point for me. It had happened after a very bad dark night of the soul where I was literally praying to die. I was literally praying that I wouldn't wake up from my sleep. Earlier that day, I had contemplated suicide, and my sister called me. I was living in Australia at the time. My sister called me on WhatsApp and interrupted that thought, thank God, because I was walking to the pharmacy. And so when she said that to me, of course, there was a part of me that was like, no, I'm not. Like, that's not a thing. I'm not addicted. And the other part of me was like, oh my God, yes, I am. I am trying to fill, I'm getting a hit. Every guy, every romance, even every fantasy, right, is another hit, right? It's another drink.
Yes.
And when I wasn't doing that, I was obsessed about my career and success. So I was toggling back and forth between these addictions, one to avoid the other. And frankly, I was so unhappy. So that was the biggest turning point, but it did start with my mom passing away. And it sort of built up from there. But that was the biggest turning point, is when I realized I had that problem. And then, of course, several months later, I had the idea for the book, and that's been evolving in the last several years. And I just started writing my book last year. It'll be out hopefully 2020. And it's been such a process. But every woman that shows up was my teacher, and she was showing me the way. And so it's been an exciting journey, but that was my wake up call.
I love that. And it's my hope that the listeners who are listening to this right now can maybe self-reflect on some horrible things that may be happening in their life right now, where they're not feeling happy, where they're spiraling down, where they're thinking, why does this always happen to me? And oh my gosh, I too have felt depressed, or I too have felt like I don't want to wake up, that they can hear you, that they can hear me, and that they can see us on the other side, and that there's maybe some hope and maybe some light that, hey, this is a glorious golden opportunity perhaps to reinvent my own life.
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely am a proponent of the concept of radical responsibility. And radical responsibility to me is that I create everything in my world, and I create my experience of that. Now, of course, there are things that happen that, you know, are out of our control. Like some people that might be listening might have been victimized in the past by other people. And, you know, by no means am I finding fault and saying you created that. I am not of the new age belief of where we take this sort of you create your own reality to the nth degree, and we create what I call new age guilt. That is not what I'm talking about here. But radical responsibility means you take responsibility for your experience of everything and how you experience it. And indeed, many of the situations in our life that we feel that we've fallen victim to, like in particular, a bad relationship or a betrayal of some kind or whatever, a bad career choice, whatever it might be, if we really sit down and are honest with ourselves, one is that we can take responsibility of how we experience that, right? That's all our responsibility and all our choice. And the other piece is that usually there's a role in that that we've played, and we don't want to acknowledge that. Like I didn't want to acknowledge that all these, you know, emotionally unavailable like men that were showing up abandoning me. I didn't want to acknowledge that I had something to do with that. I wanted it to be all about them because it's just easier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's where that growth comes in. And I just want to validate too, when people have held the mirror up to me and have shown me something that I don't want to see, I don't want to see it either.
Absolutely.
It takes a while to sit with that and go, oh, I have allowed my own vibration to shift into negativity, fear, whatever. Oh, and no, it's not, because I'm with you. I don't believe in that whole new age guilt thing. I didn't cause the victimization, but I can see how I allowed myself to be a part of it and how it is allowing me to elevate to the next level, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the experience part is like, you know, the new age guilt is like, oh, well, you must have caused your cancer because you've got these really negative beliefs and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, there might be some truth that we create our own illnesses because of things we store in the body. Yes, I agree. I'm a mind-body medicine practitioner. I believe that. Yes. But to get into self-blame about that is not conducive to healing, but rather it's like, wow, okay, how am I going to move through this illness? How am I going to move through this disease? How am I going to experience it? And what mindset am I going to have to move me through it? That is our responsibility. That's what we can take responsibility for because we have the power to do that. And for me, when I realized that I was completely responsible for having created my life as it was, then I suddenly, like after the initial grief and shock of, oh my God, like I've done this to myself, holy crap. Then it was the most empowering thing ever because then I could make a choice of how I wanted to literally go through rehab, right? Like take myself through rehab and learn to rehabilitate from this addiction, really. And it's a strong word. I use it intentionally. This love addiction, and it's love with a small L, not a capital L, as they would say in a course, and really take back my power and my life. And, you know, the secondary addiction for women is work and success. And have I made it? And how much money have I made? And did I get the promotion? And have I earned those, you know, the alphabet soup at the end of your name? And I had those two things going on simultaneously my entire life. They were running my entire life and I had no idea. And they were all coming from that primary driver of lovesick, of just feeling unlovable and who's going to love me now. And it's toxic and it's affecting women's health. And it is, you know, it does manifest in disease eventually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm guessing a lot of people out there are thinking, oh, maybe I can see myself in this. Yeah, I am keeping myself pretty distracted. I am toggling between different things. What now? Who do I reach out to? How do I move forward? What are some of the pieces of advice that you have for women? What are some of the steps that you took? What might women do now if there's that little niggling voice in their head where they're saying, yeah, that's me?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And there are women at varying degrees of this scale. And when I hit rock bottom, I literally hit rock bottom. And what I had to do, like any addict that hits rock bottom, is I needed to detox. And so I decided that for a year, I was going to date myself and I was going to date God.
I love it.
And I needed to learn to take back a hold of my mind, because when I wasn't with a man, I was fantasizing about one or thinking I might find a relationship, or maybe, and it's the littlest, tiniest thing of like, I'm going to walk into this bar and let's see if I can get someone's attention. Or, you know, whatever. So I started with the man talks, right? The man detox. And that took a while because I had to dismantle a lot of the codependency on getting validation and attention and worth and value from outside of myself, and in particular from a man. And secondary to that came where I was getting value and acknowledgement and acceptance and worth from what I achieved in my career. And it's a work in progress for all women. Like, I don't believe there is a final be all and end all cure. I think part of our human condition is that we all suffer from some level of unlovability. And, you know, so the first step is acknowledging that you have a problem, just like any other addiction, right? And acknowledging that you have a problem. I'm a workaholic. I work too much. Or you know what, I am kind of like obsessing about my relationships. And when I'm in one, I'm not even happy or fulfilled. And I'm worried about whether it's, you know, he's the one or whatever it might be.
Right.
And then, wow, I'm overworking or I'm distracting myself, or I'm like, well, screw dating. I'm not into men, and you're just headlong into a career. There's so many ways in which this level can manifest. Once you do, it's acknowledging that there is a problem there. And then really it's doing the deep inner work. And that could look so many different ways to so many people. When I work with women and it's predominantly the relationship piece, I do recommend doing a detox. I do recommend just noticing all the ways in which you are looking for external validation. And in particular, if it's relationship based from a man, or, you know, women or men, depending on who I'm working with. And so that's the first step when it comes to something like that. And the deep inner work, I mean, for me, I started doing the workbook Lessons of A Course in Miracles. That's what got me on the go.
Yeah.
And it's really about watching your mind like a hawk and doing the inquiry. I don't recommend going it alone. I would not have been able to do it if I did not have coaches and therapists and people supporting me. So I definitely recommend getting help with something like that. And it's about how deep do you want to go down the rabbit hole is what I would say to your listeners, right? Like, how much you got to really want this? The pain has to be so much that you just want the other side of it. And that's why rock bottom is awful, but it's always helpful because you really understand the pain of it. So, you know, I dated myself for a year, longer than a year, actually. I stayed single for 4 years. I dated God and started to develop a relationship with God. I had been spiritual almost my entire life. I had called myself spiritual. I had no clue what that meant. I didn't even have a relationship with spirit. I couldn't even tell you that I trusted spirit. I walked around my entire life, you know, just saying I was spiritual in name only. And, what happened is my spirituality deepened, do I still have crystals in my home? I do. Do I still burn incense? I do. But that's not what makes me spiritual. Like, that stuff is just so periphery. And I kind of grew up. I grew up spiritually. And it's the primary foundation to develop that relationship to yourself as well. So those are the steps I took. But if it wasn't for teachers and guides and coaches and therapists, you know, it's really important to do this work with support.
Yeah. There's like literally 15 things that I want to comment on that. So I'm just going to kind of whoosh start in on that. First of all, question, do you think you have to hit rock bottom, or do you think you can catch yourself on the way down?